The heat bore down on Eleanor Owens like a cruel hand pressing her into the unforgiving earth. 3 days without food, 2 without water, and not a soul in sight across the vast, empty plains of western Nebraska Territory. Her baby, Thomas, whimpered softly against her chest, his cries growing weaker by the hour. The year was 1868, and mercy seemed as scarce as rain in these parts. Eleanor's cracked lips bled as she whispered soothing words to her son. Her husband had been dead for 6 months now, killed by outlaws who'd taken everything but the clothes on their backs. She'd been traveling eastward, hoping to reach her sister in Missouri, when her horse had collapsed 2 days prior. With the last of her strength, Eleanor tried to stand, but her legs buckled beneath her. As she collapsed into the dust, clutching Thomas to her breast, she silently prayed that if she must die, God would at least spare her child. The thundering of hooves barely registered in her fading consciousness. She thought it might be death coming for her at last, until a shadow fell across her face, blocking the merciless sun. "Madam," a deep voice called, seemed to come from miles away. "Madam, can you hear me?" Eleanor's eyelids fluttered open to see a man kneeling beside her. His face was partially obscured by the brim of his hat, but she could make out kind eyes and a dust-covered face. A cowboy, by the look of his attire, with broad shoulders and a worried expression. "My baby," she whispered, her voice a brittle rasp. The stranger gently touched Thomas's forehead, then reached for his canteen. "Here," he said, holding the water to Eleanor's lips. "Small sips now." After she'd taken a few precious swallows, he dampened a handkerchief and pressed it to the baby's parched lips. Thomas stirred, making a sound that nearly broke Eleanor's heart. "You'll eat tonight," the cowboy said, his voice firm with promise. "Both of you." He introduced himself as Adam Daniels, a rancher heading back to his property after delivering cattle to the railroad. With gentle hands, he helped Eleanor to her feet and lifted her onto his horse, handling her as if she were made of porcelain. Then, cradling Thomas in one arm, he mounted behind her and urged his horse forward. "My place is about 3 miles from here," he explained, his breath warm against her ear. "Got plenty of food and a clean bed where you can rest." Eleanor couldn't respond, her energy spent simply holding onto consciousness. She leaned back against Adam's solid chest, her baby secure between them, and let exhaustion claim her. When she awoke, Eleanor found herself in an unfamiliar bed, beneath clean sheets that smelled of sunshine. For a terrifying moment, she couldn't remember where she was, and her hands instinctively searched for Thomas. "He's right here, madam," came that same deep voice from earlier. Eleanor turned to see Adam sitting in a chair beside the bed, her son sleeping peacefully in his arms. The baby looked clean, his face no longer streaked with dirt and tears. "You bathed him?" she asked, her voice still weak. Adam nodded, looking somewhat embarrassed. "Hope you don't mind. He was awful uncomfortable and you needed your rest." He stood carefully, mindful not to disturb Thomas, and placed the baby in a makeshift cradle fashioned from what appeared to be a drawer lined with blankets. "Thank you," Eleanor whispered, tears filling her eyes. "You saved our lives." Adam shrugged, as if rescuing desperate women and infants was something he did every day. "Got some stew warming on the stove. Think you can manage to eat something?" Eleanor nodded, suddenly aware of the gnawing hunger that had been her constant companion for days. Adam helped her sit up, propping pillows behind her back, then disappeared into what she assumed was the kitchen. He returned moments later with a bowl of fragrant stew and a chunk of bread. "It's not fancy," he said, setting the food on a small table beside the bed. "Bachelor cooking." The stew was simple beef, potatoes, and carrots in a savory broth, but to Eleanor, it tasted better than any meal she'd ever eaten. She forced herself to eat slowly, knowing her shrunken stomach wouldn't tolerate much at once. "Where were you headed?" Adam asked as she ate. "Missouri," Eleanor replied between careful bites. "My sister lives there after my husband died." Her voice trailed off. Adam didn't press. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow we can figure out what's next." Over the next few days, Eleanor regained her strength under Adam's quiet care. He never asked why she was traveling alone with a baby or what had happened to leave her in such desperate straits. Instead, he simply provided what she and Thomas needed: food, shelter, and safety. His ranch was modest but well maintained. A two-room cabin sat at the center of about 50 acres, with a small barn housing his horses and a few cattle. He explained that he'd been slowly building his herd over the past 3 years, since purchasing the land after the war. "Were you a soldier?" Eleanor asked one evening as they sat on the porch, Thomas sleeping against her shoulder. Adam nodded, his eyes distant. "Union cavalry, spent 4 years fighting, came west afterward looking for somewhere quiet." Eleanor understood the need for quiet. Her husband, James, had returned from the war a changed man, prone to dark moods and drinking. The outlaws who killed him had been after the money from their farm sale, everything they had in the world, meant to fund their fresh start. On the 5th day, when Eleanor felt almost like herself again, she broached the subject of leaving. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough," she said as they washed breakfast dishes together. "If you could point me toward the nearest town, I'll try to find work and save for passage to Missouri." Adam's hands stilled in the wash basin. "Nearest town's 40 miles east. No stage comes through regular." He hesitated, then added, "Winter will be here soon." Not a good time to be traveling with a little one. Eleanor knew he was right, but she couldn't imagine continuing to rely on his charity. "I can work," she offered, "to earn our keep." Adam studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Could use help around here." "Place has been needing a woman's touch." A flush crept up his neck as he added, "Got a room you're already using. You and the boy are welcome to stay till spring if you'd like." It was a practical arrangement, born of necessity on both sides. Eleanor needed shelter and security for herself and Thomas. Adam, as she quickly discovered, needed someone to bring order to his bachelor existence. She took over the cooking and cleaning, mended his clothes, and planted a small kitchen garden with seeds she found in a dusty jar. Adam, for his part, worked from sunrise to sunset, tending his cattle and horses, repairing fences, and hunting to supplement their meals. He was unfailingly kind to Thomas, fashioning toys from wood scraps and speaking to the baby as if he understood every word. As autumn painted the prairie gold and crimson, Eleanor found herself watching Adam when he wasn't looking. He was a handsome man, she had to admit, with his sun-bronzed skin and quiet strength. But it was his gentleness that moved her, the way he would rock Thomas to sleep when the baby was fussy, or how he always made sure Eleanor had eaten before serving himself. The first snow fell in early November, transforming the landscape overnight. Eleanor woke to find the world blanketed in white, pristine and peaceful. She stood at the window, Thomas in her arms, marveling at the beauty. "First snow's always the prettiest," Adam said, coming to stand beside her. Eleanor nodded, suddenly aware of how close he was and how the small cabin seemed even smaller with his presence filling it. "It's beautiful." "Yes," he agreed, though when she glanced up, she found him looking not at the snow but at her. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of how their lives had become intertwined. The moment was broken by Thomas, who reached out with chubby hands toward Adam. Without hesitation, Adam took the baby, lifting him high to the child's delight. "Think he might be ready to try standing soon," Adam observed, setting Thomas on his feet while supporting him under the arms. Eleanor watched them together, her heart constricting with emotions she wasn't ready to name. "He's growing so fast." "Strong boy," Adam said proudly, as if Thomas were his own son. The thought brought a flush to Eleanor's cheeks. That evening, after Thomas was asleep, Adam surprised Eleanor with a gift, a small wooden box with a delicately carved lid. "Made it for you," he said, handing it to her almost shyly. "For keeping sewing things or whatever you might want." Eleanor ran her fingers over the intricate pattern of wildflowers he'd carved into the lid. "It's beautiful, Adam, thank you. Been meaning to give it to you for a while," he admitted. "Just wanted to say I'm glad you stayed, both of you." Eleanor's eyes filled with unexpected tears. No one had given her a gift since James had returned from the war, and certainly nothing made with such care. "We're glad to be here," she said softly. As winter settled in earnest, the three of them fell into a comfortable routine. The short days were filled with work, Adam outside when weather permitted, Eleanor maintaining the cabin and caring for Thomas. The long evenings were spent by the fire, Adam whittling or mending tack while Eleanor sewed or read aloud from one of the few books he owned. It was during one such evening, with snow falling heavily outside, that Adam finally asked about her husband. "Don't mean to pry," he said, setting aside the bridle he'd been repairing. "But sometimes I wonder what sort of man would let his wife and child travel alone across such country." Eleanor's hands stilled in her lap. She'd known this conversation would come eventually. "James is dead," she said quietly. "Killed by outlaws 6 months ago just outside of Cheyenne." Adam's face darkened. "I'm sorry. We'd sold our farm in Kansas. James wanted to try mining in Montana." She sighed, remembering her husband's wild schemes. The war changed him. He came back restless, always looking for something more. "The war changed a lot of men," Adam agreed, his voice holding a note of understanding. "The outlaws took everything, our money, our supplies. Left me with nothing but Thomas and the clothes on our backs." Eleanor's voice grew bitter. "I tried finding work in Cheyenne, but no one wants to hire a woman with a baby. So you decided to head to your sister's." Eleanor nodded. "It seemed the only choice. I was trying to follow the railroad east, thinking I might find work in one of the towns along the way. But then my horse died and—" Her voice trailed off. "And I found you," Adam finished. "Yes," she whispered, looking up to meet his eyes. "You found us." The silence that followed was filled with unspoken emotions. Eleanor knew she should look away, maintain the proper distance between them, but found she couldn't. Something was growing between her and this quiet, honorable man, something that both frightened and exhilarated her. "Eleanor," Adam said, her name like a prayer on his lips. A sudden cry from Thomas broke the moment. Eleanor rose quickly, grateful for the interruption that saved her from feelings she wasn't sure she was ready to acknowledge. That night, lying awake in her bed with Thomas sleeping beside her, Eleanor confronted the truth she'd been avoiding. She was falling in love with Adam Daniels. It seemed impossible too soon after James, too quick to trust another man, and yet undeniable. Adam had shown her nothing but kindness and respect. He'd saved her life, given her shelter, treated her child as his own. But did he feel the same? And even if he did, what future could they have? Come spring, she was meant to continue to Missouri, to the safety and security of her sister's home. The thought, once comforting, now filled her with dread. Christmas approached, bringing with it a temporary thaw that allowed Adam to ride to the nearest trading post. He returned 2 days later with supplies, a small bag of candy, and a mysterious package he refused to let Eleanor see. On Christmas Eve, after a simple but satisfying supper, Adam presented her with the package. "For you," he said, his usually confident voice hesitant. Eleanor unwrapped the brown paper to find a bolt of deep blue calico, as fine as any she'd ever seen. "Oh, Adam," she breathed, running her fingers over the fabric. "It's beautiful." "Thought it might match your eyes," he said, then ducked his head in embarrassment. Eleanor impulsively reached for his hand. "Thank you, it's the most wonderful gift." "There's something else," Adam said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small wooden horse expertly carved and polished. "For Thomas. Reckon he's too young for it now, but someday." Tears filled Eleanor's eyes as she accepted the toy. Such thoughtfulness, such care for a child not his own. "He'll treasure it," she promised. Later, with Thomas asleep and the cabin quiet save for the crackling of the fire, Eleanor found the courage to ask the question that had been haunting her. "What happens when spring comes, Adam?" He looked up from stoking the fire, his face half in shadow. "What do you want to happen?" Eleanor took a deep breath. "I don't know, part of me still feels I should go to my sister's. It's what I planned, what I thought was best for Thomas." She paused. "But now I'm not so certain." Adam crossed the room to sit beside her on the small sofa. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low and serious, "I know it hasn't been long and maybe this is too soon to speak of such things, but—" He took her hand in his. "I care for you, for Thomas too." "The thought of you leaving come spring," he broke off, shaking his head. "I care for you too," Eleanor whispered, her heart pounding. "More than I thought possible." Adam's fingers tightened around hers. "Then stay, not as my housekeeper or as someone who needs my help. Stay because you want to be here, with me?" Eleanor looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity there, the hope. "What are you asking me, Adam?" "I'm asking if you might consider becoming my wife." The words came out in a rush. "Not right away if you need time, but someday, when you're ready." The proposal hung in the air between them, unexpected yet somehow inevitable. Eleanor thought of the months they'd spent together, of Adam's unfailing kindness, of how Thomas reached for him with complete trust. She thought of James and felt with certainty that he would want her to find happiness again. "Yes," she said simply, "I would consider that, very much." Adam's face broke into a smile that transformed him. Hesitantly, he leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers, a question, an invitation. Eleanor answered by placing her hand on his cheek and returning the kiss, tender and sweet. As they broke apart, Adam rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected to find you," he murmured. "I never expected to be found," she replied. Winter deepened, burying the prairie under drifts of snow and binding them closer together in the warm cocoon of the cabin. Eleanor began sewing a dress from the blue calico, working on it in the evenings while Adam taught her about ranching, the rhythm of the seasons, the care of livestock, the challenges and rewards of the life he'd chosen. "Spring will be busy," he explained one night. "Calving season, then branding. Summer brings haymaking for winter feed." "It sounds wonderful," Eleanor said, and meant it. The idea of building a life here, of watching the seasons change over land that was partly hers, filled her with a deep contentment. Thomas took his first steps in January, wobbling from Eleanor's arms to Adam's as both adults cheered him on. By February, he was toddling everywhere, exploring the cabin with determined curiosity while Adam followed, ensuring the boy's safety. "He's going to be a handful come spring," Adam observed, scooping Thomas up before he could reach the stove. "He already is," Eleanor laughed, taking her son and settling him on her hip. "But worth every worry." Adam's expression softened as he looked at them. "I've been thinking," he said. "About when we might marry." Eleanor felt a flutter of anticipation. "Oh, Reverend Johnson comes through these parts every couple of months, should be here late March or early April." Adam hesitated. Would that be too soon? Eleanor considered. By then, she would have been a widow for nearly a year. More importantly, she knew her heart. "No," she said, "that wouldn't be too soon." The joy that spread across Adam's face was all the confirmation she needed that she'd made the right decision. March brought the first signs of spring, patches of grass emerging from melting snow, birds returning from their winter journey south, and a restless energy that drove both Adam and Eleanor outside whenever weather permitted. He began teaching her to ride, using his gentlest mare with Thomas secured in front of her. "You're a natural," Adam praised as Eleanor guided the horse around the corral. "By summer, you'll be riding fence with me." Eleanor laughed, exhilarated by her growing confidence. "I'm not sure about that, but I do love it." As they led the horse back to the barn, Adam's head suddenly lifted, his posture alert. "Riders coming," he said, shading his eyes to look toward the east. Eleanor followed his gaze, spotting two men approaching on horseback. Visitors were rare, especially this early in the season. "Who could that be?" Adam's expression was guarded. "Take Thomas inside," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Stay there until I call for you." Something in his tone sent a chill through Eleanor. Without questioning, she gathered Thomas and hurried to the cabin, watching anxiously through the window as Adam strode to meet the strangers. The men dismounted about 50 yards from the house. Even from a distance, Eleanor could see they were rough-looking characters, unshaven and dusty from the trail. She strained to hear their conversation but could make out only a few words: water, shelter, and something that sounded like generous. Adam stood with his back straight, his hand resting casually near the pistol at his hip. After several minutes of conversation, he nodded and gestured toward the barn. The men remounted and rode in that direction while Adam turned back toward the house. When he entered, his face was troubled. "Drifters," he explained, "asked if they could water their horses and spend the night in the barn." "And you agreed?" Eleanor asked, still clutching Thomas protectively. Adam nodded. "Safer than turning them away. Men get desperate this time of year with winter provisions running low." He checked his pistol, then tucked it back into its holster. "I'll take them some food, then keep an eye on them until they leave in the morning." Eleanor swallowed her fear. "Be careful." Adam touched her cheek gently. "Always am. Lock the door behind me and don't open it for anyone but me." The evening passed in tense silence. Adam returned briefly to collect food for their unwelcome guests, then went back to stand watch from the shadows near the barn. Eleanor put Thomas to bed early, then sat by the window, a shotgun across her lap. Adam had insisted she learn to use it months ago, just in case. It was well past midnight when Adam finally returned, his face drawn with fatigue but relieved. "They're sleeping," he reported, bolting the door behind him. "I'll check on them at first light, make sure they move on." Eleanor set the shotgun aside and went to him, wrapping her arms around his waist and laying her head against his chest. "I was worried." Adam's arms encircled her, strong and secure. "No need. Seem harmless enough just down on their luck." He kissed the top of her head, "But I wasn't taking any chances, not with you and Thomas here." Dawn was just breaking when Eleanor woke to the sound of raised voices. She sat up quickly, finding Adam already gone, his side of the bed cold. Thomas was still asleep in his cradle, undisturbed by the commotion. Pulling on her robe, Eleanor moved to the window. What she saw made her blood run cold. Adam facing the two strangers, one of whom had a gun pointed at his chest. The other was holding the reins of Adam's prized stallion, along with their own horses, all saddled and ready to ride. Without hesitation, Eleanor grabbed the shotgun and checked that it was loaded. Placing a quick kiss on Thomas's forehead, she slipped out the back door and circled around to approach from behind the strangers. "I'm telling you, take the food and supplies I offered," she heard Adam say, his voice steady despite the threat. "But the horse stays." "And I'm telling you, mister, we ain't asking," replied the man with the gun. "That's a mighty fine stallion, worth good money to the right buyer." "He's not for sale," Adam insisted, "and he's definitely not for stealing." The second man laughed. "Ain't stealing if you're dead." Eleanor's heart nearly stopped at the threat. She raised the shotgun, stepping into view. "Drop your weapon," she commanded, her voice stronger than she felt. Both men turned, startled by her appearance. The one holding the gun hesitated, his eyes narrowing. "I said drop it," Eleanor repeated, aiming the shotgun squarely at his chest. "I won't ask again." The standoff seemed to last an eternity. Finally, with a curse, the man lowered his pistol. "Ain't worth dying over a horse," he muttered. "Wise decision," Adam said coldly. "Now, both of you mount up your own horses and ride out. Don't come back this way again." The men complied, casting venomous looks at both Adam and Eleanor as they departed. Adam waited until they were well out of sight before turning to Eleanor, relief and admiration clear in his expression. "That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever seen," he said, taking the shotgun gently from her trembling hands. Eleanor suddenly felt weak, the adrenaline draining from her body. "They were going to shoot you." Adam pulled her into his arms. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair, "for saving my life." The incident, frightening as it was, reinforced what Eleanor already knew. This was where she belonged. With Adam facing whatever came their way, building a life together. Reverend Johnson arrived 2 weeks later, his circuit bringing him to the neighboring ranches as scheduled. When Adam rode out to speak with him, the minister readily agreed to perform a wedding ceremony the following day. Eleanor spent the morning of her wedding day in a state of nervous anticipation. She bathed in water warmed on the stove, washed and styled her hair, and put on the blue calico dress she'd sewn with such care. It was simple but becoming, the color indeed bringing out the blue of her eyes as Adam had hoped. Thomas, now steady on his feet, toddled around the cabin in the new clothes Eleanor had made for the occasion. At 15 months old, he was too young to understand the significance of the day, but his cheerful presence filled Eleanor with joy. A knock at the door announced the arrival of their only guests, the Petersons from the neighboring ranch, who had offered to witness the ceremony. Mrs. Peterson immediately took charge of Thomas, cooing over his chubby cheeks and bright eyes while her husband went to find Adam. When the time came, Eleanor stepped outside to find Adam waiting for her, dressed in his best clothes, his hair neatly combed, his eyes shining with love and promise. Reverend Johnson stood ready with his Bible, smiling benevolently at the couple. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. They exchanged vows beneath the vast Nebraska sky, with the land they loved stretching in all directions around them. When Adam placed a simple gold band on Eleanor's finger, another surprise he'd kept hidden, she felt tears of happiness blur her vision. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," declared Reverend Johnson. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Adam's kiss was tender and reverent, sealing their union before their small but appreciative audience. Thomas, watching from Mrs. Peterson's arms, clapped his hands in delight, bringing laughter from everyone present. The Petersons had brought food to share, turning the occasion into a proper celebration. They ate at the table Adam had crafted during the winter, drinking to the health and happiness of the new family with cider Mr. Peterson had pressed himself. As the afternoon waned, their guests departed, leaving the newlyweds to settle into their first evening as husband and wife. With Thomas tucked into his cradle fast asleep after the excitement of the day, Eleanor and Adam stood together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and amber. "Happy?" Adam asked, his arm around her waist. Eleanor leaned against him, content in a way she'd never imagined possible when she'd collapsed in the dust those many months ago. "More than I can say." "We'll have a good life here," Adam promised. "Not always easy, but good," Eleanor believed him. She'd already seen the truth of it, how hard work and love could transform struggle into something meaningful, how the harshest land could yield beauty and sustenance to those willing to persevere. "I never thought I'd find this again," she admitted. "After James died, after everything was taken from us, I thought Thomas and I would always be alone." Adam turned her to face him, his expression serious. "You'll never be alone again, I swear it." As spring gave way to summer, Eleanor discovered she was expecting a child. The news brought Adam to his knees, overcome with emotion as he pressed his ear to her still flat stomach, whispering promises to their unborn baby. Thomas, now nearly 2, seemed to understand something momentous was happening. He patted Eleanor's stomach with chubby hands, repeating "baby" with solemn concentration. Life on the ranch settled into the rhythm Adam had described, the endless tasks that came with each season, the satisfaction of watching their cattle herd grow, the joy of improving their home bit by bit. Eleanor planted a larger garden, learned to preserve food for the coming winter, and helped with the lighter ranch work whenever possible. In late autumn, just as the first frost silvered the grass, their daughter was born. They named her Sarah, after Adam's mother, and she arrived with a lusty cry that proclaimed her determination to thrive in this challenging land. Thomas approached his new sister with cautious wonder, allowed to touch her tiny fingers under Eleanor's watchful eye. "Gentle," he said proudly, repeating the word Adam had been teaching him for weeks in preparation. Adam took to fatherhood with the same quiet competence he brought to everything. He would sit for hours with Sarah sleeping against his chest, watching over her while Eleanor rested or tended to Thomas. At night, he would sing softly to the baby lullabies Eleanor had never heard him sing before, remnants perhaps of his own childhood. "She looks like you," Adam observed one evening as they sat before the fire, Sarah nursing contentedly at Eleanor's breast while Thomas played with wooden blocks on the floor. Eleanor smiled, tracing her daughter's delicate features with a gentle finger. "She has your eyes, though." "And your determination," Adam laughed. "Poor child." "Lucky child," Eleanor corrected, "to have you for a father." The look that passed between them was filled with the deep understanding that comes from shared challenges overcome, from building a life together day by day, choice by choice. Winter arrived, harsher than the previous year, with blizzards that howled around their cabin for days at a time. But inside was warmth and light, laughter and love. Eleanor would look around at the home they'd created at Thomas, growing sturdy and confident under Adam's guidance, at Sarah thriving despite the harsh conditions, at the man who had saved her life and then captured her heart, and feel overwhelmed with gratitude. One night, with the children asleep and the wind moaning outside, Eleanor found Adam sitting at the table, carefully writing in a leather-bound book she'd never seen before. "What's that?" she asked, curious. Adam looked up, a hint of embarrassment crossing his features. "A journal, I suppose." "Been keeping it since the war, not regular, just when there's something worth remembering." Eleanor sat beside him, touched by this glimpse into his private thoughts. "And what are you remembering tonight?" Adam's smile was tender as he set down his pencil. "The day I found you." How you looked, holding Thomas so tight, even though you barely had the strength to keep yourself alive. He reached for her hand. How I knew right then that my life was about to change, though I couldn't have imagined how much. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. I was so afraid that day, she admitted. Not just of dying, but of failing Thomas, of not being strong enough to save him. You are the strongest person I know, Adam said simply. You just needed someone to help carry the load for a while. And now we carry it together, Eleanor whispered. Adam nodded, squeezing her hand. Always. Spring came again, bringing new calves, fresh growth, and plans for expanding their operation. Adam had been saving to purchase additional breeding stock, with an eye toward building a herd that would secure their future and provide an inheritance for their children. Eleanor watched him working with Thomas, now old enough to follow his father around the ranch, learning the ways of the land that would someday be his. Sarah, secure in a sling against Eleanor's chest, observed the world with bright, curious eyes. 5 years passed, each bringing its own challenges and joys. The ranch prospered under Adam and Eleanor's care, growing from 50 acres to nearly 200. They added a proper barn, enlarged the cabin to accommodate their expanding family, and became known in the region for the quality of their cattle and horses. Thomas, now 7, was his father's shadow, absorbing everything Adam taught him about ranching. Sarah, at 5, was a spirited girl with her mother's determination and her father's quiet strength. And there was 3-year-old James, named for Eleanor's first husband in a gesture of remembrance and respect. On the anniversary of the day Adam had found Eleanor collapsed in the dust, they always took time to remember how their story began. It had become a family tradition, a special meal, stories for the children, and private moments of gratitude between husband and wife. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if you hadn't found us that day?" Eleanor asked as they stood together on the porch, watching the sunset while the children played in the yard. Adam's arm tightened around her. "I try not to," he admitted, "but I do thank God every day that I did." Eleanor rested her head against his shoulder, content in the knowledge that sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures. From desperation to love, from hunger to plenty, from loneliness to family, their journey had not been easy, but it had led them home. "You'll eat tonight," Adam had promised on that fateful day. What neither of them could have known was how much more they would share, not just food and shelter, but dreams and sorrows, challenges and triumphs, and a love that had grown from the most unexpected of beginnings. As twilight deepened into night, Adam called the children inside. Eleanor watched her family gather these precious souls who were her world, and silently renewed the vow she'd made on her wedding day. To cherish this life they'd built together, to face whatever came with courage and faith, and to never forget how blessed they were to have found each other in the vast wilderness of the West.